Michael Westbrook sat in the corner of the cafe, his usual haunt, huddled over his laptop. He was an unremarkable figure, mid-30s, a perpetually disheveled mess, with a hoodie that was probably older than most of his co-workers, and a look on his face that screamed, "I'd rather be anywhere else." It was a usual Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where you felt like nothing could break the monotony. Yet, for Michael, today felt different. Unsettlingly different that he clicked the keys slowly, the soft clack of each press echoing louder in his mind than usual. He wasn't simply coding today. No, something far stranger was happening. Each line of code on his screen was no longer just a series of logical operations. It was alive. It was aware. His fingertips hovered over the keys, trembling. "Stop," a voice whispered in his ear, but it wasn't an external voice. It was his own mind, or perhaps something else entirely. Michael froze. His hand hovered over the keyboard, then withdrew as if he'd been burned. He blinked, shaking his head in disbelief. His pulse was racing, the familiar thrum of panic rising in his chest. For months now, he had been experiencing things. Strange, fleeting sensations that would come over him in waves. The first time had been subtle, an overwhelming feeling that the world around him was vibrating. He'd been in a grocery store, and for a split second, the shelves, the lights, the people, they all felt alive. But this was different. This wasn't a passing sensation, a flicker in his mind. This was tangible. Real. He could feel something beyond the code, beyond the confines of his screen. And it was growing stronger by the day. It had started with emotions. At first, it was simple. He'd feel the subtle changes in energy when people walked by him on the street or sat next to him in meetings. A slight shift in their posture, the way their breath would quicken, or their eyes would flicker for a second too long, things that most people would overlook, but not Michael. He could feel it. He could sense it. Then it escalated. He could hear lies. The first time it happened, he was sitting at his desk, reviewing a contract. His colleague, Amanda, had passed by his office, and without even speaking a word, he felt the weight of her anxiety. He hadn't known why at first, but the tremble in her voice as she handed him the file confirmed it. She wasn't being honest, but that was small potatoes compared to what had come next. Lately, he could feel souls. The truth was, Michael had no idea what was happening to him. He could no longer explain the phenomenon as just heightened awareness or some heightened sensitivity. What he was experiencing was something far beyond human comprehension. He could hear the beat of life in people's chest, in the air itself. The people in the cafe were no exception. He glanced around, his eyes catching a woman at the table across from him, the tension in her shoulders far too evident, the barely concealed frustration in the tap of her fingers against her cup. Her soul was frayed, like worn fabric at the edges. He could sense that she was struggling to keep it together, her anxiety hidden under layers of false calm. He closed his eyes, trying to shut it all out. The chatter, the hum of machines, the little quirks and desires and fears that clung to the people around him. It was suffocating. He wanted to scream, to claw his way out of this strange, overwhelming feeling, but he couldn't. It was then that he felt it. A sharp sensation, a piercing awareness that was both foreign and deeply familiar. A presence, like someone standing right behind him, breathing down his neck, but invisible. It wasn't a person. It was something else. His heart raced. He had to get out. He had to. "Excuse me, sir," a voice broke through his panic. He opened his eyes to see a young barista standing before him, a polite smile plastered on her face. She had the same anxious energy, the same inner conflict Michael had sensed in so many others. He nodded, half-heartedly. His focus shifted, and for a moment, he realized something. He wasn't hearing emotions anymore. He wasn't just detecting lies. He was perceiving souls. It was like a switch had been flipped, and now he could see beneath the skin. People weren't just bodies moving in space, they were spirits, flickering, uncertain, struggling to exist. He stood abruptly, shoving his laptop into his bag. His fingers were trembling as he fumbled with the strap. He needed air. He needed distance. The cafe felt too small now, suffocating, like the walls were closing in on him. As he rushed out the door, the cool air hit him like a slap to the face. He took deep, shaky breaths, trying to steady himself, but the sensation of being watched, the sensation of knowing, didn't fade. It was then that he heard it again. A voice. Clear. Intrusive. Not in his head this time. "Michael, you're ready," it said, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. His head snapped around, eyes searching the empty street. But no one was there. He staggered backward, his thoughts spinning. Who was speaking to him? What was happening? Ready for what? He whispered to the empty air. It didn't answer, but something told him that he would find out soon enough. Later that night, Michael sat in his cramped apartment, staring at his reflection in the dark window. He didn't know what to make of the events of the day. His mind was in a whirlpool of confusion, trying to reconcile what he was experiencing with what he knew to be reality. The rational part of him wanted to dismiss it all as some kind of breakdown, some strange anxiety-induced episode that would eventually pass, but deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The sensations were becoming too real to ignore. Michael leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The air in the room felt thicker now, like something was pressing against him from all sides. His breath was shallow, his pulse thudding in his chest. He knew it was coming again, the sensation, the voice, the presence, and this time, he wouldn't be able to ignore it. The next morning, Michael did something he hadn't done in years. He took a walk outside of his normal routine. The sky was overcast, the kind of weather that invited melancholy, and the streets were bustling with the usual rush-hour crowd. But Michael's eyes weren't on the people. He wasn't listening to their voices or watching their movements. No, today, his focus was on something different. Today, he was listening for the whispers, the voices in the back of his mind that had been growing louder over the past few weeks. He was searching for the presence that had been haunting him, tugging at him from the edges of his consciousness. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to it, and that's when he saw her, across the street, walking toward him, was a woman. She was calm, serene, almost glowing with an inner peace that stood in stark contrast to the chaos around her. Michael's breath caught in his throat. It was Eleanor. She had appeared, as if summoned by his thoughts, and for some inexplicable reason, Michael knew she had answers. Michael's legs carried him toward Eleanor before his mind even caught up with his thoughts. He knew she was the answer, or at least part of it. She seemed like a strange, unearthly presence, like someone who had stepped out of a dream and into the foggy grayness of his reality. Her pace was slow, deliberate, as if she were taking her time, allowing the world to adjust to her calm. When their eyes met, there was no doubt in Michael's mind that she had been waiting for him. Her gaze was piercing, yet serene, like she saw everything about him and still accepted him. It was an unnerving sensation, one that made him feel both exposed and safe at the same time. "You've been feeling it, haven't you?" Eleanor's voice was soft, a whisper among the traffic and bustle of the street. She didn't need to raise it to be heard. Her words reached him effortlessly, as if they had been planted in his mind before she spoke them aloud. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck. How could he even explain what was happening to him? He had tried to brush it off as madness, as something that would pass, but it only seemed to get stronger. The feeling of being connected to something beyond this world was growing every day, every moment. I don't know what's happening to me, he finally managed, his voice shaky. I can't stop feeling it. It's like I'm aware of everyone's thoughts, their emotions, their lives. But it's more than that. It's their souls. I can hear them, feel them. And it's getting worse. Eleanor nodded as if she had been expecting this, and Michael couldn't help but feel the weight of her understanding. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she seemed almost proud. "Because you're one of the few who are ready," she said. "Your gift is not random, Michael. You're a soul decoder. That's what they've called you." Michael blinked, unsure of what she meant. A soul decoder? The word sounded like nonsense. He wasn't anything special. He wasn't anyone important. But Eleanor's eyes, clear and knowing, seemed to reach deep into him, unraveling the confusion he hadn't been able to express. Who are they? Michael asked, his voice filled with more dread than curiosity. He already knew the answer but needed to hear it aloud, to force it into his reality. The beings who exist on a higher plane of existence, Eleanor said, her voice calm and steady. They've been watching you for a long time, Michael. And they've been waiting. Waiting for him. The words echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. He couldn't process it. Couldn't comprehend it fully. Higher dimensional beings? Watching him? Waiting for him? He stumbled back a step. I don't understand. Why me? Eleanor's expression softened. She took a step closer, lowering her voice so that only he could hear. Because you can hear them. You're able to hear their voices, their intentions, their souls. You're not like everyone else. Your sensitivity, your awareness, is a bridge between their world and ours. They need you. Michael's heart beat faster, thudding in his chest as though trying to escape. No. I don't want this. I didn't ask for this. None of us do, she said, her words laced with a deep, somber understanding. But you don't have a choice anymore. They've chosen you. It's your destiny. His mind raced. He didn't want to be anyone's bridge. He didn't want to connect with them, whoever they were. He was just Michael. He was just a guy who wanted a quiet life, no drama, no distractions, no mysterious voices in his head. You're wrong, he said, shaking his head. I'm just a regular person. I'm not a decoder. Eleanor took another step closer, and before he could react, she placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was light but firm, like a tether keeping him from floating away. Michael, what you're feeling, what you're going through, isn't a curse. It's a gift. You're hearing them because you were always meant to. A strange thought struck him then. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe there was more to this than just insanity or some glitch in his mind. Maybe this was real. Do you know what it means to be a bridge between worlds? Eleanor continued, her voice unyielding. It means you carry the potential for transformation. Not just for yourself, but for everyone. The beings on the other side, they're not like us. They exist in ways we can't understand. But they want something. They need something from you. Michael's pulse quickened, his breath shallow. He felt the weight of her words, the weight of the world shifting beneath his feet. What do they need? Eleanor looked away for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. The silence between them stretched out, thick and heavy with something unsaid. Finally, she spoke again, her voice lower now. They need a vessel, Michael. A bridge. A conduit. And if you don't choose to become it, they will find another. But it will cost them more. It will cost them something greater than you could imagine. His head spun. He felt dizzy, like he was teetering on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. The weight of her words was suffocating, and yet there was something magnetic about them, something that pulled him forward against his better judgment. Why me? He asked again, his voice cracking. Eleanor's eyes softened with a quiet sadness. Because you're ready. You've always been ready, Michael. You just haven't known it yet. The next few days were a blur of overwhelming emotions and strange, indescribable sensations. Michael spent his time in a daze, trying to reconcile the chaos in his mind with the world around him. He went to work, sat through meetings, answered emails, but all the while, his senses were heightened beyond belief. He couldn't stop hearing the voices, feeling the emotions that people tried so hard to hide. It was as if their souls were open to him now, like he was somehow more aware of them than he had ever been before. Eleanor had told him that the higher dimensional beings were waiting, that they would reach out to him when the time was right. But Michael wasn't sure what that meant. What kind of beings were they? And why did they need him? It was on the third day after his meeting with Eleanor when things took a turn for the worse. Michael was at his desk, staring blankly at the code on his screen, when the voice spoke again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't a whisper. It was a command. Michael, we are here. The words reverberated through his body like a shockwave. His vision blurred, his pulse raced, and the hairs on his neck stood on end. It wasn't coming from his thoughts this time. The voice was real, tangible, reverberating in the air around him, and it came from nowhere, everywhere, all at once. He looked around the room in panic, his breathing quickening. No one else seemed to notice. Michael, the voice said again, its tone low and deep, like a distant echo of thunder. You are the one we seek. The bridge is within you. He stood up, his legs unsteady beneath him. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stumbled toward the door, his mind screaming for him to leave, to run, but his feet were heavy, as if gravity itself were pulling him back. And then, there was Eleanor. She stood in the doorway of his office, as calm and serene as she had been the first time he saw her, but this time, there was something different about her. She wasn't just a guide now. She wasn't merely here to help him, she was part of this. She was part of them. You're ready, Michael, she said softly, almost lovingly. It's time. Michael's legs barely moved as he stood there, frozen in his office doorway, staring at Eleanor. She was still as serene as she had been on the street, but now there was an undeniable intensity to her presence, as though she had shifted from a bystander to an active participant in what was about to unfold. He couldn't breathe. His heart pounded in his chest, a rhythmic thrumming that matched the eerie hum of the room. She didn't wait for him to speak. She didn't need to. She could feel what he was feeling, just as he could feel everything else. You've been resisting it for days, Michael, Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. But the time for resistance is over. You were chosen long before you realized it. He took a hesitant step back. I didn't ask for this. His voice trembled with the weight of his fear, but it was also thick with defiance. He wanted to scream, to tell her to leave, to make everything go back to normal, but he couldn't. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt inside. He couldn't deny the strange, consuming desire to understand, to see what lay beyond the limits of his own mind. You never have to ask for it, she answered, stepping closer. It just happens. Some are born to it. You didn't choose this, but you can choose what to do with it. You're not alone in this. I'm here with you. Her words were comforting, and yet they only added to the tension in his chest. This wasn't a path he'd chosen, and the weight of it pressed on him like a vice. The room felt smaller now, suffocating in a way it hadn't before. He could hear the hum of the building around him, the subtle vibrations of every soul moving within it. The soul of the building, the soul of his colleagues, every breath, every thought, every flutter of consciousness was suddenly too much. I'm not ready, Michael whispered, his voice hoarse. I don't want this. I don't want to be what you say I am. I'm just me. I'm not some bridge between worlds. Eleanor's expression softened, and for a moment, he saw something akin to sadness in her eyes, something that made his stomach turn. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something rooted in understanding. I know it's overwhelming, she said, her voice a steady anchor against the chaos in his mind. But you are a bridge, Michael. And the choice before you isn't whether you want to be it, it's whether you will allow it to change you. The words struck him harder than he expected, as if they were a physical blow. Change. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? The terrifying truth that he wasn't just at the edge of something. He was about to be reshaped, remade into something other. The choice wasn't about accepting the gift, it was about losing himself to it. I don't want to lose myself, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The thought of fading into something unrecognizable terrified him more than anything else. To be swallowed up by something greater, to lose his very essence, that was worse than death. Eleanor reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but grounding. "You're not going to lose yourself, Michael. But you will change. And that change, if you accept it, will be the key to understanding everything. The world is not what you think it is. There are forces beyond our comprehension, beings that exist in realms far above this one. They're not like us. They're vast, ancient. And they've been watching you because they need someone who can hear them. Someone who can reach them." "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Michael admitted, the raw truth spilling out of him. "What if I can't handle it? What if I disappear? What happens then?" Eleanor's gaze softened even further, and she gave a small nod. "You're stronger than you think. You've always had this power within you, Michael. You've always been able to sense things others can't. The difference is that now, it's not just people's emotions or thoughts you're feeling. Now, it's their souls. And that's what they need." His mind reeled with her words, the weight of what she was saying pressing into him. The souls of others, he could hear them now, feel them like waves crashing against the shore. Some were smooth, calm, nearly still, while others were turbulent, chaotic, restless. He could hear their pain, their joy, their secrets, and he could no longer block it out. They weren't just emotions anymore. They were entities. "I can't," he shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. But it was no use. It didn't make sense. How could it? This wasn't just a new ability, it was a new reality. His own existence was no longer bound to the mundane. He was on the cusp of something so vast, so incomprehensible, that he wasn't sure he could even stand in it. Eleanor's eyes never wavered. She stood there, unwavering, the calm in the eye of a storm that threatened to swallow him whole. "It's not about whether you can handle it. It's about whether you'll allow yourself to become what you were always meant to be. You are the bridge, Michael. And they need you." His breath caught in his throat. The words echoed in his mind, reverberating like the hum of an electric current. They need you. He could feel it now, deep inside, in the marrow of his bones, the pull of something ancient and infinite, beckoning him toward it. The weight of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. And as much as he wanted to turn away, to run and bury himself in the safety of his old life, he knew that it was too late. He had already heard the call. He had already stepped into this world. "What if I don't want to change?" Michael asked, his voice small, almost childlike in its pleading. The question hung in the air, suspended, as though it held the key to everything. Eleanor's gaze softened. "Change doesn't mean losing yourself. It means growing. Evolving. Becoming more than what you were before." Michael's thoughts raced as he tried to process everything. His mind felt like it was unraveling, thread by thread. He couldn't go back to who he had been before. The world had changed too much, and so had he. He could hear it now, the souls, the whispering beings from beyond. They were waiting for him. He could feel their presence pressing in on him, urging him to take the next step. The decision was before him. He could walk away. He could refuse. But deep down, he knew it wasn't an option. The choice had already been made. "Do it," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "Allow it. Accept it. Become the bridge." Michael's heart skipped a beat as he nodded, feeling a sense of inevitability wash over him. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he stopped resisting. He felt the presence of the higher beings surrounding him, a tide of consciousness washing over him. He was ready, in a way he hadn't known he was until this moment, and as he embraced it, as he allowed himself to merge with the vast, incomprehensible presence, he felt his soul stretch, expand. It was both painful and beautiful. He could feel himself being remade, reshaped by something greater, something older than the world itself. He was no longer just Michael Westbrook. He was something more. Something that could bridge the worlds, and in that moment, he understood. The sacrifice wasn't the loss of himself, it was the understanding that to be a bridge, to connect the higher realms with humanity, meant becoming something greater than any one person. It meant allowing the infinite to flow through him. It meant sacrificing the very thing he had clung to for so long, his fear of change. Michael wasn't just a decoder of souls. He was a vessel, a conduit between the world he had known and the infinite beyond it, and he was ready.